So you're about to spend thousands of dollars on brand new wheels and tires for your S650. You gotta make sure they fit, right?
Yep.
So here are some simple steps we're gonna talk to you about to make sure that you're getting the proper fitting wheel and tire for your new S650. I'm Scott Boda with Steeda Autosports. This is Jamie Bell, our resident expert, and we get a lot of calls about wheel and tire fitment issues with the new S650 Mustang. So Jamie, what's some of the things we've learned with this newer S650 that's different than the predecessor, the S550?
With lowering springs, they seem to lower the cars a little bit more than what we were seeing with the S550s. It's not so much of a weight issue. The weight is about the same as an S550, but they just seem to have a little bit more of a drop when you're looking at the wheel compared to the body. If you don't have the right offset wheel, you can run into rubbing problems at the quarter panels in the back or the fenders in the front.
That seems to be one of the most common things we hear about is in the rear of the car, the wheels actually rubbing those fenders. So you mentioned offset. What do the different numbers mean when someone's looking for a set of wheels?
Well, when you figure out what diameter and what width wheel you want, say it's like a 20 by 11, the offset number is how far in or out that wheel is going to sit in relation to the hub that it's mounted to. The higher the number, the further in the wheel is going to go.
So the more you're going to tuck it underneath the car.
The more you're going to tuck it. But there's only so far you can go in. You're going to run into the inside wheel housing, and there's only so far you can go out. And so far what we're seeing with these fitments on these cars for a 20 by 11, a 52 to 58 millimeter offset. 19 by 11s are running roughly the same.
Okay.
If you start going to a lower offset number than that, say a 50 or a 48, the tires are going to start rubbing on the wheel openings.
Especially, that's going to move the tire and wheel out.
It's moving the tire and wheel further out. The same problem happens at the front. It has to fit the front of the car properly, and those usually, we're looking at 32 to 39 millimeter offsets for the front wheels, depending on the width. They keep them from scrubbing the insides of the fender wells or for the tire just sticking out too far.
Okay, so that helps clear up a lot as far as the offset of the wheel, what you should be looking for in the front and the back of the car. Now what about tire sizes, aspect ratios? Talk to us about that.
Well, the first thing you're looking for once you decide what diameter wheel you're going to use and what width is what tire is going to fit that wheel properly. That's not going to either be stretched too far or pinched because it's wider than the wheel. The first thing you're going to look for is the number of what the width of the tire is, and that's usually the first digits on the tire size.
So like a 305.
305 is 305 millimeters.
Yep.
That's how wide it is.
And then the next number?
That's the aspect ratio of how tall the sidewall is in relation to the width of the wheel.
So now that's something you could figure out with math, right? You could take the 305, multiply it by that aspect ratio. Say it's a 305, 35. You'd multiply 305 times 0.35, then you got your two sidewalls. And then the next final digit is going to be?
It's going to be your rim diameter.
Okay, and like you said, you can go online, there's lots of different calculators, or you can figure it out yourself, how to figure out your overall tire height and make sure you're gonna be able to fit it into that wheel well. So now, you can actually take the wheels that are currently on your car, what came with your car from Ford, and you could kind of use that, right, as a baseline to see how wide, how tall you can actually go, right?
It's a good guideline because in the backside of the wheel, it's going to give you all the information. The DOT requires that they have what the wheel size and the offsets are and what its load rating is, and you can use those numbers to help you get started on finding the correct fitment wheels.
So you figured out which wheels you like, you know what offset, what kind of tires we're gonna go with. What are some other things that might affect the fitment of these wheels?
How the rear subframe fits under the car, how the front subframe fits under the car. If they're not squared to the car properly, it can shift the wheel over to one side of the car more than the other, and that's gonna definitely cause an issue. Wheel alignment can cause a big problem, especially if the car's been modified. If it doesn't have the correct camber for the wheels and tires that you're going to run, that can greatly affect how they fit. It can have them where they're actually hitting the wheel openings where they normally wouldn't.
That's if maybe you're running too much positive camber, right? Not enough negative camber, sticking the wheel too far out.
Especially in the back of a S550, S650 Mustang, that the camber is adjustable from the factory. You can have too much positive camber and definitely cause a fitment issue, especially if you're running a 305 or a 315 width wheel.
Now, speaking of the rear of that car, we were talking about subframe misalignment. Now, one of the first things that you had a big hand in when the S550s came in was our subframe alignment kit, right?
Yep, trying to get rid of that big space between the bushing and the bolt to keep the subframe from being able to move. That is definitely something that would help if you do have an offset condition with your subframe. It's a quick, simple solution to that problem.
Yeah, it just gets that rear end, the whole rear subframe completely square underneath the car, and you're gonna, maximize what kind of wheel and tire package you can fit underneath that S650.
Another thing that can change how your wheels fit is wheel spacers. Especially the front of their car, especially the S550s with their stock wheels, to move them closer to the wheel opening.
Okay.
Until they bought, a nice set of aftermarket wheels. If you left them on there, it can definitely cause a problem. They can also be used to correct an improper fit wheel or a rear fitment wheel that you're putting on the front. So you bought a full set of 20 by 11s and the offset's 52. You can put a 1-inch spacer in the front and make the wheel where it properly fits the front of that car.
That's really nice. So keep that in mind too. Wheel spacers, that's a pretty inexpensive thing comparing it to a set of wheels and tires.
Oh, definitely, especially if you already have the wheels, or it's easy to get the rear fitment more than the front fitments, especially in the larger widths. The 52 to 58 offset is the most popular. So having the proper wheel spacer can make it where it fits the car like it's supposed to.
So wheel spacers, we talked about the rear camber. What would you do in the front, since there really isn't much camber adjustment from the factory?
Well, there's no camber or caster adjustment from the factory, just toe. And if you've lowered the car, you're probably going to have some means to readjust your camber to get it back to factory tolerances. The simplest is camber bolts. They're not the best option. They're not as strong as going to a full camber plate. A full camber plate is your best option because of how it moves the entire strut. You're not just pivoting at the knuckle to the strut joint, where you're limiting your tire wheel fitment because it's actually moving that tire closer to the strut.
And in some cases, depending on your driving style and things like that, the camber bolt can actually lose adjustment sometimes.
Camber bolts can loosen up. They're a smaller diameter bolt than the factory bolt, and that's how they have to be able to be adjusted. And if it's not a good quality bolt, it can stretch, it can bend, it can break. Do not recommend them for track use.
No.
They're just for street cars to fix minor camber issues.
So you got your car, you got your wheels, you put a set of Steeda progressive springs on the car, whatever lowering springs. But you maybe want to just raise it up ever so slightly. Instead of having to buy a whole new set of springs, what's out there that could just give you a little bit of ride height adjustment?
Well, we offer different thickness spring spacers for both the front and rear of the car to help make small adjustments to the ride height. If the back of it doesn't sit like you would like, it doesn't quite look correct for your wheel tire combination, simplest solution is going to be a spring spacer.
Now, this doesn't limit spring travel or suspension travel like back in the old days when we used to crank a knuckle into the spring to actually spread it up higher. Doesn't affect anything like that, right?
If anything, it's going to help your overall ride quality or your range of motion on your suspension by lifting the suspension back up using the spacer.
Okay.
Because it will give you back some of that lost motion that you took out by lowering the car.
With these newer S650s, you take off your factory wheels, you put in a nice set of 20-inch Tridents. Is it going to affect your speedometer?
It can.
Okay.
And currently, the only way to readjust your speedometer and odometer is going to be to carry your car back to the dealership and have them correct it with their equipment. They have a limited amount of change they can make, but it's usually enough to get your speedometer corrected.
You put a nice set of wheels on your car, you maybe lower it down, and now you're doing 65 when you think you're only doing 60, so that'd be a terrible situation. So now that we learned what we can do to maximize wheel and tire clearance and how to check and source different wheels and tires, what would be a really good 20-inch wheel front and rear tire setup, non-squared?
275, 285 in the front, 35 aspect ratio, whether it be a 19 or a 20, fit really well.
Okay.
Especially on a 10-inch wheel. If you have a 32 to 37 millimeter offset, how much offset's really going to depend on the tire, tire selection, wheel selection. In the rear, 305, 35, 315, 35, and either a 19 or a 20 is usually about as much as you can get under the car and be able to live with it on a daily basis. You start going into 325s, 335s, they're going to stick out or they're going to rub. It's just because of how wide that tire is.
Let's face it, it's not a Corvette. You just don't physically have the room back there to put on a 325, 335, something like that. And now for a squared setup, what would you suggest in the front?
You can go up to a 305 without any problems.
Oh, wow.
On an 11-inch wheel. It's going to probably require using a spacer to get it to fit properly. We've run 305, 35, 19 squared on our white HPDE car.
Okay.
And we run a 305, 35, 20 on our street wheels. We use a 1-inch spacer in the front. They fit the car really well. They don't stick out. They don't rub. The combination works really well.
Now, we can't answer every possible wheel and tire combination, ride height, lowering spring, you name it. So if you have found a wheel and tire combination with a set of lowering springs that works great for your S650, leave a comment below. You might be able to help some other people out there. If not, check out our 2024 Plus Mustang S650 group. It's loaded with tons of information out there that can help you with your next wheel selection. Or reach out to one of our talented sales reps. Hit like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and remember the most important thing, Steeda, where speed
matters.